We would like to now welcome Pacific Grove High School from Pacific Grove, California, to give the first presentation. Hi, my name is Juliana Heritage. I'm from Pacific Grove High School.
I'm Sarah Bitter.
And my name is Sterling Halberstadt. Due to family emergency, Elaine Kim could not join us today, but she has been instrumental to the success of our project. And our project is on supporting the nuclear weapon ban treaty, a look at the role of education. Okay. Right now, there are some 14,550 nuclear weapons that exist today. 93% of those weapons are owned by the US and Russia combined. The rest are owned by countries on the UN Security Council, as in the United Kingdom, France, and China, along with non-UN Security Councils like India, Pakistan, Israel, and most recently, North Korea. The number of nuclear weapons in the world has declined significantly since the Cold War, down from a peak of about 70,300 in 1986 to an estimated 14,550 in late 2017. However, of those, 5,100 await dismantlement, but 9,450 are in military stockpiles. Of those, 3,900 warheads are deployed with operational forces, with 1,800 on high alert, short notice use. In an effort to limit and eventually eliminate nuclear weapons, several multilateral and bilateral treaties have been implemented among many nations. These include the Partial Test Ban Treaty, or PTBT, which prohibits nuclear explosions in the atmosphere, in outer space, and underwater. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, that orders states without nuclear weapons will not obtain them, and orders states with nuclear weapons will begin disarmament, and establishes that all states can use nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. The Seabed Treaty, which prohibits placement of nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction on the seabed as to prevent a nuclear arms race. And the India-Pakistan Non-Attack Agreement, which obligates each country not to participate in or encourage actions that would destroy or damage any nuclear facilities or installations in the other country. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, or CTBT, which is open for signature in 1996, but prohibits nuclear explosions for testing of nuclear weapons. Although it has not entered into force, almost all nations adhere to its guidelines. The International Convention on the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, which makes any involvement with nuclear terrorism, as in the plans, threats, or actual terrorist acts, criminal. The New START Treaty, which is between the US and Russia, which limits countries to 1,550 deployed strategic warheads, 800 deployed and non-deployed ICBM launchers, SLBM launchers, and heavy bombers for nuclear use, with the number of deployed not surpassing 700. These numbers have yet to be achieved, but the treaty is still in force between the two countries. There also exist several large areas of nuclear weapon-free zones around the world, treaties that obligate parts of the world, from single countries to whole continents, not to develop, make, possess, or obtain any nuclear devices. These include all the areas shown on the map, including the Antarctic Treaty, the Treaty for a Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean, the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone, the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapon Free Zone, the Nuclear Weapon Free State of Mongolia, the African Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Treaty, and the Central Asia Nuclear Weapon Free Zone. The most recent effort to regulate and eventually eliminate nuclear weapons is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, also known as the Nuclear Weapon Ban Treaty. The treaty was crafted by the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, which is based in Geneva, Switzerland. It is a merger of hundreds of NGOs, or non-governmental organizations, coming together to raise awareness about the nuclear threat and enact a lasting change. The treaty prohibits states from possessing, acquiring, developing, testing, transferring, or receiving nuclear weapons, and states cannot show that they would use this type of force to threaten any other countries. On July 7th, 2017, 122 nations voted to adopt the treaty. It was opened for signature on September 20th and signed immediately by 57 nations. It has currently been ratified by 7 nations: Cuba, Guyana, Holy See, Mexico, Palestine, Thailand, and most recently, Venezuela. The treaty also uses each state's current agreements with the International Atomic Energy Agency, and states can withdraw given extraordinary circumstances. The states have to wait 12 months after they withdraw before they are no longer bound to adhere by the treaty, and if the states are in an armed conflict during the time of withdrawal, the treaty applies until the conflict has ended. Arguments against the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons include a lack of verification protocols. Some states argue that the NPT has a low safeguard standards and a lack of credibility in verifying countries' adherence to the treaty, which may engender distrust between countries. Some nuclear weapon states and their allies contend that it would undermine the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty because the NPT contains the only current disarmament obligations as adopted by all members of the UN Security Council, the concern being that the nuclear weapon ban treaty would diminish unity and create more divisiveness amongst nations. And they also say that the treaty is incompatible with NATO agreements, such as most NATO countries and Japan boycotted the session in which the NPT was voted on, and the Netherlands is the only NATO country that attended the UN conference on the NPT, but they voted against it.
Okay, so another specific challenge, President Trump's nuclear agenda. Not only did the US boycott the UN vote on the NPT, but President Trump has made it clear his intentions for the US nuclear arsenal in several ways that contradict the NPT. Modernization. President Trump has planned to assume a budget of about $1 trillion to refurbish over the next 30 years the current stockpile of nuclear weapons and to begin developing new, modern nuclear weapons. The modernization of nuclear weapons raises major questions. Questions of how this development will affect non-proliferation and how other treaties and how this statement will affect military relations with Russia and China. The nuclear triad. The nuclear triad refers to the three main types of nuclear weapons that are currently accessible to the US. The strategic bombers, land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, or SLBMs, that make up air, earth, and sea legs of the US nuclear force. Current modernization plans are underway to upgrade those weapons. Hair trigger alert missiles. The United States has roughly 900 nuclear weapons, on some 100 ballistic missiles on a hair trigger alert. Hair trigger alert means that the nuclear weapon can easily be launched within a minute's notice, and that if it is launched, there is no pulling the weapon back. Policy for nuclear weapon usage. The United States does not have a no first use policy, nor a sole purpose doctrine. As such, the government can reserve the right to use nuclear weapons first, in scenarios other than self-defense. Secondarily, Russia's nuclear agenda. Vladimir Putin has openly stated that there will be intensive efforts to develop and enhance the technology of Russia's nuclear weaponry and defense systems. Russia's nuclear agenda currently in motion includes modernization of forces. Russia commenced the state's armament regime, 2020, in 2011 to strengthen the technology of the Russian armed forces from 2011 to 2020. The goal of SAP 2020 was to upgrade 70% of Russian arms and equipment by 2020, including the three main legs of the nuclear triad. Russia's development of these weapons has sparked a multitude of debates concerning their compliance with treaties. New tactical weapons. Modern Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles are MIRVed or equipped with multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles and built with maneuverable warheads, able to target multiple trajectories, that are able to counter the US missile defense program. Furthermore, Russia is developing modern submarines that could carry up to 16 Bulava, a variant of Russia's modern SLBM missiles, with up to 6 warheads each. Russia is also developing a new type of bomber plane called the PAK-DA. Dual systems. Russia is developing a dual-use system for nuclear weapons, which means weapons can be deployed in both nuclear and conventional variants. With this new technology, the line between nuclear and non-nuclear weapons becomes much more unclear.
Now, after conducting our research, we decided to respond to the challenges faced by the treaty by looking at the effect on support for the ban treaty. In order to see the effect of education, we started an awareness campaign at our school in which we asked students questions to gauge how much they knew about nuclear weapons, and then presented an interactive slideshow that educated them on the harmful effects of nuclear weapons. This allowed students who had never learned about nuclear weapons, or who only had a surface knowledge gained from cursory coverage in classes, to digest the devastating effects of nuclear weapons and nuclear radiation. Our slideshow specifically focused on the health effects on people, and approximately 50 students viewed it in the library so far. I will now present the slideshow and the students' reactions to each slide. The title is Effects of Nuclear Weapons and a Plan to Abolish Them. We started with the immediate effects of nuclear weapons and opened the section with a question. When the atomic bomb exploded above Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, how many people were killed and injured immediately? Most students guessed D, but a few got it right. The answer is C. We also informed the students of the atomic bomb shadows left in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that anyone within 1 kilometer of the blast was almost guaranteed to die. Students already knew that instant death occurred with the dropping of the bombs, but seeing the area on a map helped them visualize just how much destruction occurred. Our next section was short-term effects, such as hair loss, scarring, severe keloids, bleeding, flash burns, nausea, and even death. When asked what they knew about the short-term effects of nuclear radiation before the presentation, students responded with scars or burns, but were shocked by the intensity of scarring that they saw in the photo on this slide. Other short-term effects include a combination of symptoms called acute radiation syndrome, which ranges from diarrhea to reduced blood cell count to hair loss and fewer stem cells. Survivors were also vulnerable to roughly 13 types of cancer. Students already understood that cancer was a health effect of nuclear weapons, but did not know that the effects of nuclear radiation on the human body were so comprehensive. Next, we had long-term effects, where we informed students of the higher chances of cancer, and that half of pregnant women survivors suffered miscarriage, stillbirth, and death. Babies born alive often suffered from severe deformities, distorted skulls, brain lesions, and neurological abnormalities. Here, students realized that nuclear radiation can affect the next generation. Radiation poisoning also affected food and water, which showed the students that nuclear radiation does affect all aspects of life. We also told the students about the stories of two hibakusha, Mrs. Kasaoka and Mr. Yamawaki. For many students, the bombing seemed to be a part of the past, but being introduced to the stories of hibakusha helped them see that there are still people alive who experienced the bombings. Most students reacted very strongly to the illustration of Mrs. Kasaoka's father. Our next section was on the effects of nuclear testing, that an estimated 2.4 million people will die as a result of atmospheric testing done between 1945 and 1980, and that more than 2,000 tests were conducted in 60 locations. When most students think of nuclear radiation, they think of nuclear weapons, so it was important to remind them that nuclear testing also results in health consequences. After discussing the health effects of nuclear radiation, we focused on the Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty, where we gave a basic overview of the treaty. That it was a global agreement that bans countries from possessing, developing, testing, or using/threatening to use nuclear weapons, and that was put forward by the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Before the presentation, when asked about what the treaty did, almost every student responded, "Ban nuclear weapons," which they had gleaned from the treaty's title, because most students were not familiar with the treaty, and those who were only had surface knowledge. We also informed the students that 122 nations voted to adopt the treaty at the United Nations Conference, that the treaty was currently signed by 57 countries and ratified by 6 countries at the time when we gave the presentation, and that it would go into force once ratified by 50 nations. Almost every group of students that we showed this presentation to had a lot of questions about who had exactly ratified the treaty. They wanted to know if some of the big names in the nuclear game, like the US or Russia or North Korea, had ratified it. But we informed them that they were countries that they had not really thought about being involved in nuclear weapons, like Thailand, Palestine, Mexico, the Holy See, Guyana, and Cuba.
As part of our Raising Awareness campaign, we showed the booklet from the ICANN website, which we used as an external source in our presentation and educational effort. So we took a few key points from the booklet, such as the legal importance of the NBT, that it clarifies ambiguous and non-existent international law on what extent nuclear weapons may be developed, tested, produced, etc. The booklet also includes a section entitled Catastrophic Harm, which was the most compelling aspect of the presentation for most of the students, as it forced them to recognize the devastating consequences of nuclear bombs are far more extensive than cancer and death. We then conducted video interviews. After they viewed the slideshow, we interviewed 10 students and asked them some basic questions about nuclear weapons. A generalization could be made about each of these questions. Question number 1. In response to this question, we found out that the majority of students know that nuclear weapons have negative effects, cancer, mutations, and total destruction, but they are unaware of the acute and specific environmental and biological damage that nuclear weapons cause. Question number 2. In questioning students on the number of nuclear weapons which countries possess them, it became clear that students had only surface-level knowledge on this topic. The most common responses were the US, Russia, North Korea, and China. When asked how many nuclear weapons actually exist, the answers range from a few hundred to millions. Question number 3. When asked about the treaties that govern nuclear weapons, students often replied, "I know that there are rules and laws that govern nuclear weapons, but I have no idea what they are." Question number 4. Every single student, without exception, said that all the information they knew about this topic came from their English and history teachers and classes. Without this education, no student would have actually known the specific damage that nuclear weapons could cause. Question number 5. When asked what they thought of the nuclear weapon ban treaty, 2 things became very clear. 1, that students supported the idea of the treaty but were wary about the practical application of it. And that 2, not a single person we interviewed knew of the treaty prior to our presentation. So now we're going to play some of the responses to question number 5.
Treaty would be a really good idea because at the moment with all the nuclear weapons in the world, if just a small percentage of them were to go off, the world would be sent into darkness for multiple years, and it would really affect agriculture, and not to mention all the death and destruction it would cause in the places where the nuclear weapons went off. So I think it'd be very important to prevent something like that from happening in the future.
Adrian Clark. I'm in 10th grade. I think whatever we can do to kind of govern nuclear weapons a little bit more is good, because nuclear weapons don't seem like a good idea at all, and they really seem like something that other countries just use to make other countries fear them, and I think overall it's a good idea.
I am Kira Kiyama, and I am in 10th grade. I think that it's a great idea because honestly no one should have the power to kill that many people, and no one should have the ability to just snap their fingers and then they send thousands of innocent people to their deaths.
My name is Sami Abdo, and I'm in the 11th grade. I also believe that this treaty would be beneficial overall to lower tensions between several countries such as Pakistan and India, who have had heightened tensions since the 1980s, especially since both countries have developed nuclear weapons.
My name is Reem Benny, and I am a senior at Pacific Urban School. I think that it's a great idea on paper. I signed the petition, but personally I think that maybe the treaty should be changed a little bit because I feel like it'll only work and other countries will only want to sign it if it goes in increments.
So once the students had been informed of the topic, we asked them if they were willing to support the NBT. So far, 64 students have signed the petition, as well as some staff members, including our vice president. Not vice president, vice principal. Our target is 200 signatures, which is about a third of our student body, and then we will send the petition to our senators and congressmen to make our voices heard. Congressman Jimmy Panetta's platform has expressed an interest in nuclear nonproliferation in the past. In our awareness effort, we created an interactive PowerPoint, we interviewed students, and we made a petition, all in an effort to get students to be aware and educated on this very important treaty. We will continue to host events in which we help other students, along with staff members, to learn about nuclear weapons and the NBT. We also plan to circulate the petition in our history classes in order to inform our peers on the current status of nuclear weapons and to gain additional support for the nuclear weapon ban treaty. Finally, we will send the petition to our legislators in hopes of moving them towards supporting the NBT and any additional measures to create a nuclear weapon-free world. Thank you. Any questions?
There's a thing. Should we stand up there? No. Oh, right.
Igor, Novouralsk, Russia. In your opinion, what is more terrible, effects of nuclear weapons or disaster caused by use of peaceful nuclear energy? We should know that in Chernobyl now no live people, but in Hiroshima and Nagasaki there are beautiful cities.
I think that it's on? Okay. My personal opinion is that although both are very horrible events that I think we're all collectively here trying to stop, that it's more on side of Chernobyl because it's something that you don't always think about every day. While Hiroshima and Nagasaki were something that was in the news for a long time, and Chernobyl was in the news for at least where I was for a week and then left. And I think that's a lot more worrisome than when we're all focusing on it.
Thank you. Thanks.
My question is, do you think students successfully become aware of some various effects? And if you think so, why?
Well, I think we can all testify that the students we showed the PowerPoint to and the students that we actually tried to explain some of the effects of nuclear bombs to came to the conclusion that nuclear weapons cannot be used. And I think that we still have a very long way to go with education, but I think it was a really good start. Okay, yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
I'm Sukrit from the Harker School. So I really appreciate your efforts to educate a lot of students about the harmful effects of nuclear weapons in the treaties, but I believe a lot of congressmen and diplomats themselves are not fully aware of every single treaty that went on. So what are your just general plans or general ideas to educate our politicians on the harmful effects in the treaties which are used to alleviate the nuclear weapon problem?
All right. Well, I don't know if I have I do have direct access to them, but I think a better plan for us would be to educate our local community, and then our community would then choose congressmen who would be educated on nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons treaties. So that's why we're starting with kind of a grassroots campaign to educate students. So, I mean, hopefully if we're thinking ambitiously, we could expand this campaign for more citizens and to contact our congressmen as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.